So out of the 5, the 2 that are coming in the most frequently for the past decade have been Rostanavi and Kutsanavi.
Rostanavi and Kustanavi.
Yep. So
I got to remember these words: Rostanavi and Kustanavi.
If you look here, these are the Kutsanavi. They're very flat on top. They're round, but they have sawtoothing. Males will have more marginal flaring than the females. But overall, this is a good example of full grown. Females will only get up to about 7.5 inches, and males will barely get under 6 fully grown. So they're very typical of what you're going to see in the pet trade all over.
Okay, so say that one again.
Sorry, Kutsanavi. And I was wrong. It's Bogdavani that is the second highest.
Bogdavani. So I had a 9th grade civics teacher. His name Mr. Bogdan. So I will remember Bogdavani. Okay, Kustanavi and Bogdavani.
Yes. And the male was in my right hand. The female was in my left. They are similar, but I'll show you. I got to switch gloves. I'm sorry. So if you look at, so this is the Bogdavani male, and this is the Kutsanovi male. You're going to see the Bogdavani is going to be longer. It's still going to have a little bit of flaring in the back, but it's more elongated than you're going to see with any of the others. So that is one difference that they have that almost any others don't. You're not going to see a longer, narrow Russian unless it's a Bogdavani.
Okay, long, narrow Bogdavani.
If you're not looking at another tortoise, though, I'm not sure if you're going to really notice that it's longer. So it is longer than it is wider by a bigger margin than, I mean, the Kutsanovi is as well longer than it is wider, but it's a much closer measurement. I mean, it's almost as wide as it is long versus the other that's, I don't know if I get it.
I can definitely see that animal on the right is more elongated.
Yeah.
What about that pattern? The one on the left seemed to have more black on its shell. Is that?
Yep. So this is a male and a female Bogdavani. The female again is a little bit more elongated.
Okay.
They don't have a definite flat. I mean, they're not flat like the others. So let me get. If you look at this female, she's got a much more defined flat versus this one.
So your left hand is Bogdavani?
No, Kutsanovi.
Kustanovi.
And they're going to be more flat right at the top.
Okay.
Versus the Bogdavani is not going to have a defined flat.
Okay. So I always say, can I put a coffee mug or a can of pop on top of the shell for a Speaks Hingeback? You're gonna see a little flat area, huh?
Yeah. But to go to the coloration, so these are the 2 Kutsanovi again. Give me just a sec. I'm going to let these guys down so we can see them a little easier. Okay. My wife's going to really appreciate me getting everything down here, but
Happy wife.
So the coloration, these 2 are much more darker.
Those are Kustanovi?
Yes. versus the Bogdavani, which have much more bone color to them. I don't know. I'll bring.
Yeah.
I'll bring.
Yeah.
So, but the reason I'm not too caught up on the coloration is it's not the most reliable way to ID them. You're going to see a lot of colors. A lot of their environment's going to impact that. You're going to see different shades of red, and that red clay you see in the south. They're going to absorb a little bit of that and then show it in their carapace. So, and I've noticed that too. When I add fresh peat moss, all of them look darker for quite a while after I do that. So it's not that it's not a valid way to ID them. There are some differences, but as they age, and you'll see with some other ones, it gets to the point where a lot of them are faded out, and you're not going to notice it.
Okay. So morphology, that is big. And for those that have joined us, welcome. It's difficult for me to monitor the chat tonight, so if you guys have a question and we don't get to it, just keep asking it. We'll find it. We have a little feedback in the audio, not sure why. Apologies for that. So we're looking at Bogdavani and, oh man, I'm forgetting it now.
Kutsanovi.
Kustanovi. And what we're learning is that Bogdavani has a slightly flat topped carapace,
Um,
and it also has a more elongated carapace than Kustanovi.
yeah,
And in your opinion, these two subspecies, Bogdavani and Kustanovi, are the two most common Russian tortoises that you might see.
yeah. That said, we're seeing plenty of Kazakhstanica, and we're seeing more Rostanavi, and we're even seeing more Horsfieldy coming in.
And we'll get into those.
Yeah,
Um, let's talk a little bit about the flaring on the shell.
yeah.
Did those two species exhibit any particular flaring on the shell or
Yes,
differences?
and that honestly, that's one of the reasons these two subspecies are, in my opinion, two of the hardest to ID correctly. Mainly because they're very similar in size and in shape. The color you can start to notice a little bit more, and it is really that flatness that you're going to see at the top. The the issue with both of those, the anterior marginal scoot is larger than the posterior marginal scoot on both of them. So they already look very similar.
Okay, can you show us that?
Yes, the distance in between these is larger than the distance in between those.
Interesting. On both of these.
Yes. So the distance between the pectoral scoot or the anterior scoot versus the femoral scoot or the posterior scoot,
Okay.
they're going to be larger anterior.
Okay. For those just joining
Those
us, looking at Bogdavani and Rostanovi.
those aren't the only. So I've got all of them. If you want me to show.
Yes, Bogdanovi and Kustanovi, again, two most common. Yeah, there are others, but those are very typical Russian tortoises. Bogdavani, little flatter on the top, more elongated shell. And as far as coloration of the carapace, not necessarily a good indicator because it's quite variable and it can be different due to environmental conditions and also change over time. So for these two species, quite similar but slightly different shape on top of the shell, and then one is more elongated.
Yep.
Let's compare these two to another one.
So the next up is going to be Kazakhstanica.
Kazakhstanica.
And with Kazakhstanica, you're going to have a wider rear than you are the front, but you're going to have a lot more flaring than you saw in any of the others, with a strong sawtooth. I don't know if you can pick that
Oh
up.
yeah, totally. And the rear is much wider than the
um,
So are
so
they officially listed as subspecies?
yes, there are 5 distinct scientifically listed subspecies, not locales or morphs or anything like that. But both of these, the Kazakhstanicas, the thing with Kazakhstanicas, the scoot seams, femoral and pectoral, are going to be equal in size,
Okay.
but you're going to see a major sawtoothing,
Yeah.
so that you're not going to see with the others.
Could you show us that scoot seam character again?
So the scoot seam, the pectoral, and the femoral are
Oh
equal
yeah,
in size.
same size, and that separates them, the Kazakhstanica, from the Bogdavani and Kustanovi.
Yes.
I'm practicing. I'm learning. I'm
Yes.
reinforcing.
So those are the 3 most common, and they're also the 3 I would say most similar. With Kazakhstanica being the largest, they'll get up to almost 10 inches for
Okay, so
female.
and they look really round too. Um,
Yeah,
Matt, Katie Bradley says, Matthew, it'd be really cool if you could make a poster. I
that's
agree. I
that's in
can
the
help
works.
with that. I have Photoshop, so
Hey,
um, and I would love to come out and make a video too someday,
yeah,
and we can edit it, and that'd be great. Okay, so that's 3 of the subspecies. Kazakhstanica, really round.
yep,
Um, and flared and serrated rear marginal scutes. That's what we look for in Conyxis lobatiana. So which ones uh, do we see with deformed shells in reptile stores? Um, and I think
sadly, yeah.
that's the problem. When you get a deformed shell, it's very hard to identify them.
I should have brought one in from that group too to show. But yeah, I mean, you can tell. It's almost like you can tell when they were imported at 4 inches, and then when they were started being fed dog food,
Yeah.
have an inch growth in a year. It's yeah,
There's
I
there's
laugh.
also a request to see the Stefani, Mastacoli, Rigatoni, Lazzamani, and Barati. So I don't think those are real subspecies.
Nope, haven't heard those.
Okay, so
So
we just looked at Kazakhstanica. What's next?
the next 2 are my favorite, and just like those 3 were kind of similar and hard to distinguish, these 2 are very similar, but a little easier to distinguish if you know what you're looking at.
Okay.
So these are Rustanavis. They're a lot more speckled. They've got less coloration on them. They are much smaller. You can, I don't know how well you can see this old guy here.
Really interesting.
I'm guessing 50 or 60 years old. And
Wow.
I mean, he's just a little guy.
Okay, so you got to say their name like 3 times when you introduce them.
Rustanavis. They're going to be
Rustanavi.
more drab. They can even get down to the point where they're almost golden in color. They'll eventually even lose more of that black.
Okay. So
Um,
Rustavani as opposed to Kustanovi.
Rustamavi.
Rustamavi. Okay.
Then the female, which when I got her, she was completely covered in nail polish.
Oh,
So
nice.
I'm still working on getting some of it off,
Yeah.
but she's an absolute doll. Very small. Just like with the next one, you're going to see more dome, but the rear end really it ends abruptly. There's no taper to it.
Interesting.
It just really closes down. You'll see on these, you've got smooth rear marginal scoots. You're
Okay.
also going to see the posterior is larger than the pectoral, or the posterior is larger than the anterior, or
Oh,
pectoral is
interesting.
smaller than the femoral. And then,
Rustamavi?
yes, Rustamavi.
Rustamavi.
Another thing
I'm
that
gonna
you'll
know
notice,
all 5 by the end of this. I'm just gonna know their names.
so again, this is the Kusanagi. If you can see even their plastron is less colored than most other Russians, which are completely dark.
Interesting.
And you can see a major difference
Why are
in
their
their
tails
overall.
so big, Matthew?
What's that?
Why are their tails so big?
Because those are boys.
Oh,
Um,
that's what David Letterman would ask Jack
yeah.
Handy.
So all of those bring me to my favorite, which are the nominate species.
Horsefieldy, or as I would say, Horsefieldy, or Horsefieldy.
So you may be looking at this one and saying, "Hey, didn't you just hold that guy up?"
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Tricking us.
You see here, here's the male Horsefieldy, almost a solid gold at this point because he's old. And here's a Rustamavi. Both of them very, very, very similar. What you're going to see on the Horsefieldy that you're not going to see with the Rustamavi is they've got a domed. There's no flat spot, and on these you do have a flat spot.
I can put my soda can right there.
Yes, but the same issue as with the other ones. Their scoot seams are the same. The anterior is smaller than the posterior.
Okay.
But the big thing that you're going to be able to notice the difference with is just the size. Here's a fully grown. Oops, sorry. Here's a fully grown egg-laying Rostamavi female. Here's an
Wow.
adult Horsefieldy. So there's a big difference in size.
The Horsefieldy, they get so big. I mean, they almost look like a Greek tortoise or something like that when you see them in the wild on iNaturalist. I mean, it doesn't really even look like a Russian tortoise.
Yeah, and they will climb quite a bit. This is Big Mama. She's really friendly. She loves dandelion flowers. She'll chase me across the enclosure anytime I walk out with anything yellow in my hand. Um, yeah, she's a doll. But honestly, this girl right here is picture perfect proof of how outgoing Russian tortoises can be. Um, they they're known as a shy tortoise that doesn't really do much. But if you see this girl out in the wild, or if you see this girl out in the yard, she's going to come up to you and say hello. She's not scared of you whatsoever. And she's a wild caught animal that was brought in when she was young, but raised well and taken care of. And I'd like to anthropomorphize them more, but they've been here long enough. She realizes where food comes from, and she's going to go get that food because she likes to eat. And and I don't mind that. I'm fine with it. But I do think they're a lot more outgoing and intelligent than people give them credit for.
All the species,
Yeah.
subspecies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I as someone that has had a pet tortoise in the hingebacks that were always cheapest 35 years ago before Russian tortoises hit the scene, um,
Yeah.
they're awesome. It's just if there's a lot of something, it's not interesting.
Yeah.
As soon as there's not a lot of them, boom, people want them, right? It's
Right.
not okay. So guess what? We're gonna do that all over again because repetition is important, and
Yeah.
I here my scientist brain, being a taxonomist for 22 years. The scoop or the scoop ratios, let's call it.
Routines?
That looks like we can essentially divide them into one of three groups using that character, right? So the Custanovi and the Bogdanovi, their front scoop length is longer than their rear.
Yep.
So we're going to start all over again. We're going to look at the Custanovi and Bogdanovi again,
Okay.
if we can. And I will send you a box of gloves.
Oh no, I've got plenty.
But
Sorry.
send Matthew a box of gloves, guys. Do you have a Patreon? Do you have a tip jar somewhere on your website? Who's your turtle and tortoise?
I don't even charge for adoptions.
Well, we need. Thank you for this education. So we're gonna. So bottom line, there's two species that are kind of similar. They're Bogdanovi and Custanovi. Take it away.
All right, so Bogdanovi, they're going to be more drab. They're not going to be as dark. They're going to have more color to them. They're going to be longer than they are wider. They're going to have sawtooth, but not sawtooth like you're going to see in the Kazakhstanica. Their anterior is longer than their posterior.
Yep.
They have a dome to them. They're not completely flat.
I don't know. That was hard to see.
I mean,
Could I put my?
if you compare the two, it's not as, I guess,
That's
pictures
tough.
don't do it justice, but looking at it here, it's clear as day. But
Yeah. I get it. Yeah, I see what the one in your left hand is flatter for sure.
the big thing is how long they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rip my.
So Bogdanovi, longer. Custanovi, more rounded.
Yes. Next,
And
Kazakhstanica.
the Bogdanovi is also flat on top.
Yes.
And these two have the anterior seam longer than the posterior. Okay.
Next up is Kazakhstanica, which somebody had asked who gets the lighter yellow color, which captive bred, you're going to see a lighter color in most. Just, I don't know why. Every captive bred I've ever had looks like it's a lot more vibrant than any of the wild caught that I've had. But overall, with the wild caught ones, the Kazakhstanica I've noticed has more with that lighter yellow color.
Okay.
In comparison to, you've got a more greenish, drab olive color with the Bogdavan. So the Kazakhstanica, the big things you're going to look for is the really big sawtooth
Flaring
and marginal
sawtooth.
flaring, and then your shoot seams are going to be equal in size.
Okay.
And they're going to be bigger.
Kazakhstanica.
Now,
Bogdavani and Custanovi.
then,
And Rustamavi, I think, is coming up.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I said it right.
So the Rustamavi are the smaller,
Rustamavi small.
more round. They've got no flaring to the rear marginals. If you want to call that flaring, and when you see the other flaring, it's like when you see this compared to the others, this isn't marginal flaring.
No.
So, but they're very similar. Low to the ground, good dome, just basically softballs. They're nice and round.
Super cute.
Yeah, that's why these two are my favorite. I would highly recommend Rostamavi for anyone that's looking at keeping them indoors. part of the year. And
Okay, Rostamavi.
and then horsefieldy are the other round, no marginal flaring, but much larger tortoises.
Okay.
Males, I mean, males are going to be small regardless, but in comparison to the Rostamavi male, the horsefieldy males are going to be larger.
Are they the biggest?
They are.
Wow.
So, I mean, females will get over 11 inches, and males will get almost 8 inches.
Wow. That is really cool. So I'm gonna bring up the chat here and zip through it. So, um, Katie said, which one is typically sunflower yellow? And we noted that was
Kazakhstanica generally has a lighter color, but that's
and then
not,
Katie.
by no means is that an identification. That
Sure. Katie also said, which is the subspecies that is often greenish?
um, Bogdamani will have a green hue to it quite often.
Yeah. Good old Mr. Bogdan, my ninth grade civics teacher. So does Exotic says, yes, we definitely need a high quality photo or poster that shows all the differences. Dan from Dan's Turtle Room says, are these scientific names or the common names?
Scientific name: Testudo horsefieldy Bogdavani, Testudo horsefieldy Kutsanovi, Testudo horsefieldy Rostanavi, Testudo horsefieldy Kazakhstanica, and Testudo horsefieldy. And then there's Testudo horsefieldy Trubisci, which is at this point extinct, but hopefully there's a.
Kyle says, which subspecies would you say is the most cold tolerant?
That's a hard. I mean, Kazakhstanica really are bulletproof. I mean, they really can take some cold temps. And I saw that question. No,
Yep, we'll get to it.
they're Testudo again. They're not Agrilism.
Yeah.
They had started their own subgroup for a little while, but then they reformulated Taxa and put them back in with Testudo. And mainly, I think a lot of the reason because they could hybridize with other Testudo quite easily.
Yeah. I mean, if we really differentiated and knew that these subspecies were separate and not breeding, totally isolated, yeah, maybe you could say Agrionemes is somewhat valid, but yeah,
Yeah.
we definitely use Testudo now in the U.S. Which
Oh,
which which did you say was your most cold tolerant?
Kazakhstanica, I think, would probably hold the title for most gold. And I say that because I don't know if there's any literature on that, but observation on my part, I tend to see them out longer in the year. I put them down last because they're still out. I mean, they'll come out on 38-degree days and sit in the sun. There'll be snow on the ground. You know, it'll be 38 air temp. There'll be snow in their enclosure, and they'll come and sit on it. And
That is really cool.
it's funny because I've got a wood turtle enclosure near there, and it.
Patrick says, let's really hope the nomadic peoples of Mongolia still have some of those thought to be extinct. Dawson Laylor, who wants you to run for president, he wonders what subspecies is the most skittish.
You know, I don't really know if I would say one is more skittish than any of the others. I think generally by the time they get here, they've gone through so much stress that a feather dropping could freak them out. You know, I mean, I think that's more of the circumstances than a subspecies thing. That said, I will say that horsefieldy tends to be the most outgoing, but I don't know if I would say any of them are more timid than the others.
Justin says, which is your personal favorite?
Horse filthy, and I love Rostamon.
Katie is our German student, apparently. She read a paper in German that had Kazakhstanica only awake for a total of 3.5 months out of the year in the wild.
Yeah, that's awake. That's not active. That's just awake. And
Yep.
it's like 5% of their life or less. They're actually moving.
Yeah, like above ground. And if you go back, if you listen to the Let's Talk Turtles episode that Ryan and I did with Matthew, uh, or the last live we did, we really got into some of that stuff. Very fascinating species for sure. Um, are there ones that are more likely or most likely to hybridize?
Um, I have not seen any, or I have not seen or heard of anyone who has successfully hatched any horse filthy integrids. So I don't know if that's just because their size. I mean, if they've got a really large female that's 10, 11 inches, and you've got a smaller Kushnavi or Bogdamani, I don't know if they can necessarily. I don't know if the males can get the job done. So I think that may be an aspect of it. They are more domed than some of the others. So the males may. I mean, honestly, if you're used to breeding a female that's this big and more flat, lower to the ground, and all of a sudden, so you're at this angle, and all of a sudden you're at a female and you're at this angle. I mean, I'm no
Just the physical size and
I'm no total
morphology.
sex expert, but I think there's probably some mechanical issues that come across with that.
Absolutely. Michael Thathuvaswamy says, "Have we seen any hybrid offspring with Hermans or any other testudo?"
They have been documented hybridizing with Hermans and Greek. Um,
Interesting.
I hadn't heard any with marginated, and I believe the only Greek they did was Mesopotamian and Ibera. And I think all of those are in captivity. None of those were in the wild, I believe.
Has anyone put a Rastamavi with Egyptian tortoise?
I wouldn't want to risk it. Just knowing what horsebuildings come with and how
Yeah, that's
somewhat irreplaceable Egyptians are now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That was kind of blasphemous. That was my attempt at being blasphemous.
I won't tell Ralph if you won't.
Okay. Maybe I'll just pop one in his enclosure the next time I'm over
See if
there.
he notices.
See what he thinks. Like, how'd that get in there? Damn it, Arbor. Okay, we can get into this a little bit. Soda's Exotic says, "So, what is the story behind farm raised?" The last time Matt was on, he said farm raised or really just wild caught. How do they go about doing it?
So there's two ways that I know of farm raised going on. One, it's just a flat out lie. They're collecting them all into one area. They're raising them for a few weeks until the exporter comes and ships them off. The other manner in which farm raised happens is when they do collect wild caught animals and those females lay eggs for them. They take those eggs and either incubate them or let them naturally hatch. And then they raise them up a little bit and sell them from, once they reach 4 inches. Uh, I have a hard time believing that that's a common practice. Raising up tortoises, we all know how long it takes. These guys are wanting to make money now. I mean,
Yeah,
I just do not see. I mean, they're not going to get any more money from them.
yeah.
It's
There's a really good paper that was published by the European Union that basically just trashes the whole Russian tortoise,
2004.
the legality of Russian tortoise exports. Let's just say that.
Yeah,
So if you
was that
Google like
2004?
Russian tortoises, Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. You can find that paper. I'll try to link it on my Facebook page because it's a farce.
Yeah. I probably cited it in my talk at TTPG.
Yeah.
Probably in my second.
Dan asks, how are the wild populations doing?
If he can get some people together to go do an honest assessment, we'll find out. But
Yeah.
until then, this is what I'll say. When they announced that they were going to start exporting and they started doing studies, and those studies were done, to my knowledge and to everyone that I've spoken with, there is no new studies that have been done since then. The last one was done like in '91. They have raised the export numbers exponentially since they started. I don't know how they can justify that without a new study being done for the populations, but like I think I've mentioned it before, we're seeing animals exported from countries where they're not native. So the only way that can happen is if they're being smuggled into that country so that they can be exported, which is going to happen out of Afghanistan. We don't deal too much with exports out of Afghanistan anymore. That's going to happen with Tajikistan quite a bit because they don't have a good export company. They just don't have the infrastructure to do a lot of exports.
Yeah.
So
I mean, these countries are so poor. Their ability to regulate the trade in a wildlife species is unbelievably limited compared to what we have, right? I mean, their people are in horrible living situations. Their economies are awful. They don't have a well-funded wildlife agency making sure their turtle laws are being enforced. And that's why international trade is such a nasty thing. So one of the things that Dawson, someone asked, Dawson says, "What helps you guys learn the scientific names best?" Now, what I'll say about that, Dawson, is we can learn the names. The names are easy. That's just repetition. But I think probably what you're meaning is the characters that are separating the different species, right? And for me, what stood out to me was first use that seam ratio, the front to back seam ratio, and then you're gonna use that. It'll put it into one of three groups. Um, if it's about equal, that's in the middle, and that's Kazakhstanica. And then if the rear is longer, then you have a choice between like a giant one and a little one. Um, and then if it's the reverse, you look at the slightly elongated shell versus and flattened versus the round. So for me, it's this seam ratio. That's what I would use.
That's why I'm always talking about plastron picks when people ask me what a subspecies is.
That's where you start probably.
Yeah.
Because that's you know a carapace is usually pretty deformed, but a plastron, it's hard to get a deformed
Yeah.
plastron.
I've seen a few. There's actually
Shoot up.
well, so I actually someone just had me ID some a while ago, and if I had looked at the first one, I would have thought it was a Kutsanovi with a slightly messed up plastron. You can see where it had grown a little different. It was longer on one side than the other, but it wasn't extremely big. So I kind of ignored the scoots on that until they sent me a picture of the second one, which was a hatch or a clutch mate of it, and I knew immediately, okay, it's an integrate. That's it didn't have the second one didn't have any sawtooth. The first one had sawtooth. The marginal scoots were, or excuse me, the pectoral and the femoral scoot seams were opposite. So yeah, I knew it was a messed up plastron. But yeah, that's why you really got to look at all of the characteristics, and I don't think jump into any conclusion. Really get your calipers out and measure.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, that's what a scientist does. They literally get out their calipers, they measure 100 of each one,
right,
write
it's not.
down the average, and then they write their key.
Yeah,
Katie talked about it'd be cool if we could make a flow chart that would narrow down those characteristics. Um, if you're familiar with the taxonomic key, Katie, that's exactly what you're talking about. It's a series of couplets, and you are asked one question, and you choose A or B, and then you go on to the next question. You choose A or B, and that could be done. Jennifer A is asking, is genetic testing for these on the horizon for your average keeper?
I think so. Based on what the prices were 5 years ago to what the prices are now, and based on the number that you needed to have for a batch 5 years ago to what you can get now, I think you used to have you'd have to have 100 or 150 to get it done. Now that you can get it done as little as 25 samples. So that makes a big difference. The price has dropped significantly. It's still expensive. It's not. It's expensive enough that I haven't been able to do all of mine yet. But
That's really interesting.
I think it's going to be. I think all that. I mean, look, Ancestry DNA is what they run $59 specials now, and 23andMe, all those are all genetic testing, and the price on those has dropped significantly. So everything else is kind of going in the same direction. I think eventually we'll be able to do home swabs with it and
Yeah.
send it in.
Yeah. Katie says, how much for one tortoise in a batch of 10? If you did 10, what's the unit price?
I don't remember. The last I saw it was 25 was the minimum.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
want to say, I think it was like 125 each at
Yeah.
25 batch.
Yeah.
So I mean, still expensive.
Not cheap.
Yeah, the
I
test
mean,
is more expensive than the tortoises.
I'm sure they would, if you paid them $2,500, I bet they'd do one for you.
Yeah,
I was just listening to the interview Chris Hagen did with
Chelonian
Michael
cats.
on Chelonia cats, and he spent like 10 years of his life developing primers for this type of work. That's just
Yeah,
cool. Never knew.
neither did I until I heard that.
Now he's growing turtles and tortoises.
Yeah,
Well, guys, we have come to 45 minutes. If there are any last minute questions, please put those in the chat. Matthew, I thank you a ton for joining me with the
yeah.
tortoises and showing us
Thanks for
these
having me.
animals in person. And I want to talk about next week's show. We are going out of the shell for the first time, and I'm going to have Will Espenshade of Capitolo Farms. But you know Will, we've talked to Will a lot. I said, Will, we can talk about anything, and Will wants to talk about
Our
monkey-tailed skits.
arboreal tortoises, man.
Yeah, they are arboreal tortoises without a shell, and that's what we'll be talking about next week. So, just kind of mixing things up, we'll do one of these out of the shell episodes every once in a while. And
I think that's
Matthew
so cool.
joins us at the first Thursday of every month. Matthew is with us. So, Matthew, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Looks like
As always.
we are all good for the evening. I think we answered all the questions. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week, Thursday, 8 p.m. Like,
Yep.
subscribe, share, tell your friends. We need to grow the channel. Really appreciate your help.
For the turtles.
For the turtles. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks, guys.
Adios.
See you guys.